Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Samech Aleph. We're up to Seif Tet, Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph of regular Dafei Mishna Berurah. A very important Seif. Maran writes, Asur lomar shema shte pa'amim, ben shkofel atevot shomer shema shema, ben shkofel pasuk rishon. It is not permitted, it's not permissible to repeat the psukim of Shema, whether it is that you're saying Shema Shema Yisrael Yisrael, you're what we call kofel atevot, or even if you're finishing, or well, especially not even, if you're finishing the pasuk and you're going back to say Shema Yisrael as an entire pasuk, again, both of them are asur. This is what we had the Gemara in Lamed Gimel Amud Bet in Masechet Brachot when we did it together, and here we see it being brought la'alacha in Shulchan Aruch. Now, the reason for it is because mishum de nira'eh keilu mekabel alav shte reshuyot chas v'shalom. It looks like he's accepting two different authorities upon himself. And how about if you're saying Shnai Mikra V'Chad Targum? The Ben Ish Chai writes in Od Yosef Chai Parshat Vayigash. So if you're saying Shnai Mikra V'Chad Targum, it's fine because it's clear that you're reading the Torah. You're not accepting Elakuta V'Kadosh Baruch Hu. Whoever sees it is, it's clear that you're saying Shnai Mikra V'Chad Targum. So therefore, it is fine. You're not accepting Hashem's Malchut. You're just reading the Torah. And Chacham Ovadia writes the same thing. It's interesting. The Kaf HaChaim is not too happy about that. So it says the second time you say the pasuk, you should say it belachash. Say it quietly. It says belachash. There's no problem. So therefore, say it quietly. Later on, we'll see that Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul, generally speaking, was not happy with saying it quietly, and that would be fine, as we will discuss. But regarding Shnai Mikra V'Chad Targum, seems like again, if you want to be hoshesh for the Kaf HaChaim, Kavala bracha, you could say the second time more quietly, but nevertheless, Meikar Adin, halacha is like Ben Ish Chai and Chacham Ovadia, that when it's clear from your activity that you're not doing Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, you're just reading Chumash, and the pattern is clear that you're doing every pasuk twice, that would be fine. There is no problem whatsoever with that. Now, how about if there's halacha that if you hear a tzibur saying Shema, you should say Shema with them. You don't want to not accept Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim when a whole tzibur is doing it. So imagine you're in one of those areas that there are a lot of minyanim by the Kotel HaMa'aravi, or you are, in one of those shuls, the shtibbles that they have every 5 minutes, they have a minyan, and you hear Shema, so you say Shema with them, and then literally a minute later, you hear Shema again. Can you say Shema with the second sibur a second time? So yes, it is fine, no problem. Because again, this is a tshuva that was not printed really. The Yalkut Yosef brings this in the name of his father, a tshuva miktav yad. That's fine because again, the scene by itself is clear that you are just being part of that sibur. You're not accepting two different authorities upon yourself. Therefore, there's no problem with that whatsoever. Now, how about people who are around a deadly ill individual that is b'shad yitziat neshama? Any second the neshama is going. So people want to say Shema as part of course, the vidui and the things that you say with a goses, a shchivmara. But the minhag is people want to say Shema that when they say Ahad, the neshama should go out. So can you say Shema more than one time? That's not necessarily a proper thing to do. It's not sufficient reason, says in Kuntres HaYechieli, it's not a proper thing to do necessarily. Now, there's a minhag that the Kaf HaChaim brings, a very interesting minhag that when they encountered, today we learned the Mishnah about the Zvaot, the Ra'adot, when we have earthquake. The Kaf HaChaim brings in our Siman that there was a minhag that they used to say Shema, that if Tas v'Shalom, the house falls on them and they die, they should have said Shema the last thing they say. So the minhag, says the Kaf HaChaim, is that if they say, and then still the Ida is going, still the earthquake has not finished, They say it again and again and again. It's a minhag, the Kaf Chaim says. He says, well, it's a minhag. You know, but he says, I'm not so happy about the minhag. He says the proper thing would be not to do additional times because it's a Shulchan Aruch. You don't want to say, even though that it's, one could argue that it's clear you're doing it because of this reason, not because you're accepting more than one authority, but the Maaseh, the Kaf Chaim is not too thrilled about this minhag altogether. And if you read the pasuk and then you say it in Aramaic, the Kaf Chaim writes that that's not a problem. It's only when you read it together, you know, in Hebrew, in the same language, Lashon HaKodesh, and you repeat it in Lashon HaKodesh, which is a problem. But if you read it and then you say the Targum, that is no problem. And Rav Pe'alim, the Ben Ish Chai in Chelik Bet, also writes the same thing in Siman Tetvav as well. So that gives us a little bit of general sense of what's included and what's not included. Now let's take a look at the Mishna Berurah. The Chafetz Chaim writes, what do you do if you didn't have kavanah the first time? That's something that perhaps is the most important question to be asked and to be answered in this Seif in Shulchan Aruch. What do you do if you didn't have kavanah? Chas v'shalom. Right? You know, we learned in the beginning of the fourth parak in Masechet Brachot in Yerushalmi, even the Tanaim and Amoraim, they used to vent to each other how it was difficult sometimes for them to have kavanah. This happens to the best of us. You said Shema, you realize afterwards you didn't have proper kavanah. As we mentioned before in the previous Seifim, you have to have kavanah for understanding the words, and you have to have kavanah, also mitzvot tzrichot kavanah type of kavanah. That you have to be mindful that this is the establishment and fulfillment of a mitzvah d'oraita of b'shoch v'cha of gumecha. If you didn't have any of those kavanot, you're in bad shape. You're not yotzeh. So what do you do if you said Shema Yisrael and say, "Oops, I was not mindful of what I said." So it says the Mishna Berurah, Yachzor ve'ikra belachash. You go back and you read it belachash. You read it quietly. Now the Ben Ish Chai agrees with this. The Kaf Chaim agrees with this. Acham Obadiah agrees with this, but the Or Letzion, as I mentioned before, Acham Ben Surah Bashaul, he says from the fact that you see Maran does not say that idea, does not mention this heter, that Maran did not differentiate between saying it belachash or saying it out loud. So hence the Or Letzion is mahmir. He says no, do not say it belachash, because that is included in what Maran says in the Isur that the Gemara says in Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. So what do you do? So says the Or Letzion, you pause a little bit. You pause a little bit because there's no Isur to say it separate from each other. If it's only if it's mamash back to back, it's Asur. If you pause in between, there's no problem really. Now, what is exactly the level of pausing? This is really a Taz. The Taz says this. Let's read the Mishna Berurah is going to bring the Taz, and then we'll discuss what the Sephardi poskim have to say about it. But says the Mishna Berurah, says the Mishna Berurah, if there's nobody there in the room, you can even say it out loud because there's no mar'it ayin, which is a very interesting thing, because normally when something is asur because of mar'it ayin, we say is afilu behadre hadarim is asur. Even if you go inside room is asur. Actually, parenthetically, there's a very interesting Shara Melech. There's a discussion whether or not you could drink human blood. Right? So human milk, we know it's mutar to drink. Right? It's not asur. It's actually considered haram. It's not even milk. But what about human blood? Human flesh, we know it's asur. Human skin, even. It's a big thing. People sometimes bite the skin off and they're nervous when they're thinking, and sometimes they swallow. That is problem because elu she'oran kipsaran, one of them is Adam. So it's at least a isur aseh, maybe even more than that. A person should not be, well, at least the Rabbanan for sure. You should not be eating your skin, right? But human blood, it's not asur to have if if it's not a isur of marit ayin, right? So what do you do if you are bleeding in your teeth, in your gum, and you bite on a sandwich and you take the sandwich, the half that you bit into is bloody now, and you see blood on it. Can you eat it? The problem is, it's marit ayin. It looks like you're eating blood, so then you cannot do that. How about if you're bleeding in your gum and it's just going into your mouth and you're swallowing it? Do you have to spit it out? Or can you just swallow it or drink it, right? Can you do that or not? The halacha is mutar. So asks the Shara Melech, wait a second, why is it not marit ayin? You're telling me that if I bite into the sandwich is asur because of marit ayin. So what's the difference? Afilu b'hadre hadarim is asur. So says Shara Melech Yesod. He says chadra hadarim means if you take the walls off, you're standing in the middle of the Times Square, then it's asur. But here there's no walls; it's inside my mouth, and that's not considered an isur of chadre chadarim or marit ayin because nobody could see. So here again, you could ask and answer why exactly it is that if nobody's there, you could say it even out loud. It's not a problem because nobody's there to think that you are accepting two different reshuyot chas v'shalom over yourself. So therefore, says the Mishna Berurah, it would be mutar. Now, says the Hafetz Chaim, ubeslichot mutar lomar shema bechol pam shomer v'yavor. Right? Ashkenazim say shema every time they say v'yavor, and the kevan shemafsik harbe bentayim because there is a longer pause in between them. No problem with that. Lo michzik shte reshuyot. V'ayin betaz, here is where he brings the taz. The taz in Siman Samach Gimal, later on in Shulchan Aruch, he says, Gamken the im mamtin ezezman, that if you wait, if you pause a little bit in between saying Shema once and then a second time, it will be mutar. The en meshatkinoto, we don't quiet him down, ela im ken koreshta pamim resufim, unless he is reading it twice back back to back. Shema Shema Yisrael Yisrael or Shema Yisrael Shema 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 Yisrael Shema. That's the way we. If it's not back to back, you pause in between. That is fine. But it's not even ugly. Not only we don't quiet him down, it's not even problematic at all. Now, what is this pause? What's the time of the pause that you have to have? Right? Mishna Berurah doesn't explain how much pause you need. Right? The Kaf HaChaim also doesn't give really a time measurement. It just says, you wait a little bit, yamtin me'at, right? But the Ben Ish Chai gives time. Ben Ish Chai says you pause amount of time that you could finish the first parasha of Va'ahavta. Whatever that takes, it's like 30 seconds, 1 minute, whatever it takes a normal person to say the first parasha, that's the pause that you need. Chacham Ovadia says, no, mapito, why do you need such a long pause? Arba amot. The amount that it takes for a person to walk 4 amot, that's the time you need to pause, which is not much. It's like, 2 seconds, 3 seconds? That's the time that you have to pause, and then you could go and say it again. Now, the Or Letzion says that you should not pause, only keeping quiet, read the first parasha, whatever it is, and then go back. This is absolutely not, because you are getting yourself into a machloket of maybe it's hefsek to read extra psukim. Says just keep quiet if you have kavanah, keep quiet 4 amot, and then say it. So what's the halacha l'maaseh? The maaseh, I think you could combine to be safe according to everyone. You could combine the heter of reading it belachash that we mentioned before, right? Even though the Kaf HaChaim disagrees with that heter, but others bring it. Combine that with the weight, right? So this way, yamtin me'at, you wait a little bit and say the second time belachash. Say it belachash, and then go on, and that combination could keep a person, Bezrat Hashem, safe. But again, the best would be not to get into trouble to begin with, and have kavanah, do it the first time, do it right. That would be the best way of doing it. Now, says the Mishna Berurah, HaPasuk HaRishon, this that the Isur is whether he is repeating words in the pasuk or the entire pasuk. Says the Mishna Berurah, Ita bebet Yosef, Maran writes in Bet Yosef, the mi pasuk rishon v'hala en chashash, that after the first pasuk there's no real problem. But the Rif does not seem like that, and therefore the Magen Giborim, who brings also from the Meiri that the person should be mahmir, that we should not even repeat the psukim or the words after the pasuk of Shema, but the Maaseh, but Kriyat Shema Lamita, many people, they can't fall asleep, they have insomnia and so on. They want to repeat Shema until they fall asleep. So it says that you could repeat after the first pasuk. In other words, you say Shema once, and then if you haven't fallen asleep yet, you go back, instead of going back to Shema, you skip the first pasuk, you start from after, right? And that you could be mekel in that way. Now, the Kaf HaChaim also writes that the person should be mahmir like the Meiri, that even in the subsequent psukim after the first one, you should not be repeating them for no reason. But again, that's in saying Shacharit and Arvit by Kriyat Shema Shalamita, as we mentioned, one could be more lenient. Now, why is it that the subsequent psukim would be a problem, even though that's not Kabbalat or Malchut Shamayim? So the Bet Lechem Yehuda explains the Shita of the Rif and the Meiri. He says, even though that you're not accepting Or Malchut Shamayim, you only accept that in the first pasuk, but nevertheless, because all of Kriyat Shema is accepting Or Malchut Shamayim and all mitzvot, therefore, when you repeat other psukim, also it seems like you're accepting more than one authority. But the Petach Hatvir from Turkey, he writes that the Rif and the Meiri, they're mahmir because the psukim subsequent to the first one, even though that you did not have kavanah, you don't have to go back and repeat those psukim, and you go back and read them. People are going to have chashat. People are going to think that he is accepting the psukim, the authority of another reshut chas v'shalom. But if you have sorech, he says, if push comes to shove and you didn't have kavanah and you want to repeat them, says you could do it. Just do it quietly, belachash, and you will be good to go. Now, Maran writes in the next Seif Yud, כשקורא קריאת שמע על מיתתו, מותר לקרוא את כל הפרשה ולחזור לקרותה. Here is what the heter that we just mentioned before. Maran writes it actually. He says, when you say קריאת שמע על המיטה, you could repeat the קריאת שמע. ויש מי שאומר שגם בזה יש להיזהר. There are those who are mahmir even with this, that they say you should not be repeating it more than one time when it comes to pasuk rishon. So therefore, comes out the same thing that we mentioned before, that the rest of it you could repeat, but the first pasuk you should stay away from repeating, even though that's not one of your 2 times saying Shema of Chiyuv, you're saying Shema Lamita, still something to be mindful of. Now, says the Chafetz Chaim, Mashma dafka al mitato kedei l'ishtakeh b'shena. Only when you want to go to sleep and you want to fall asleep through saying psukim of Shema, because of Shemira, that's when it's mutar to repeat the rest of the Shema. But b'makom acher asur. But if you just stam as they want to say it, would be not proper. Afilu parasha kula shte pamim. Even if you're saying the entire parasha and then you want to go back and say it again, is not the proper thing to do. But Kriyat Shema Lamita, it's a specific heter that you could do it short of the first pasuk. When Yireli, says the Chafetz Chaim, it seems to me that kol ze davka im kore parashat Shema levada, but im kore gam ken sha'ar parashiyot, if you're reading the rest of the parashiyot, also not just the first parasha, says the Chafetz Chaim, then it's not a problem. In other words, those who say only the first parasha of Shema, that's the problem. But if you're saying the parasha of all mitzvot of Vayah, and also say the parasha of Vayomer, then you could go back to the beginning. After you do all 3 parashiyot, you could go back to the first one after all. Says Maran in Seif Yud Aleph, let's just cover one more short Seif. Ha'omrim Those who in Slichot early in the morning and also in Tfilat Ne'ilah say 2 times Pasuk of Shema Yisrael, Yesh lelamedam shelo yomeru. That's not the right conduct, even though that has become the minhag of some places. You should teach them that that's not a correct minhag, and they should cease to say it twice. And the Bach writes that you don't have to be mebatel the minhag where you have a clear minhag like that. And also the Rabbah writes the same thing, but the Levush and Lechem Kamudot, others disagree. And the Minhag Aon seems to also concur that it's a minhag that is not considered a proper minhag. Hence, best would be to nullify the minhag. And even though that the Kaf HaChaim brings the explanation of this heter that the Bach writes, the Maaseh, there would be best way would be to try to create education that this is not the right thing to do and change the minhag, which is a longer discussion of when to and when not to change a minhag, as the Pri Chadash discusses this at length in the beginning of the Chod Yom Tov in Siman Tav Tzadi Vav, B'ezrat Hashem, for a different talk, a different time. We'll continue this in the days to come.